I want to have a philosophic discussion about LaMDA, the computer at Google that some folks think is conscious. And it's all in the news right now because this ethicist, Blake Lemoine, is making the argument that it is sentient, and he's sort of whistleblowed it, and now they're going to maybe fire him or whatever. Who cares? That's not the point. This video is going to be a deep dive into the philosophic implications. And it is not going to deal with like the surface level, this is what's going on, because there's already tons of articles and tons of videos about that. And if that's what you want, go watch one of those. This is going to be about a philosophy. And in particular, is LaMDA conscious? How can we know what if LaMDA is conscious? What does that even mean, and what are the implications? And in particular, this video, I may do more than one. This one's going to be about epistemology. That is, how can we know whether or not LaMDA is conscious? Take it for granted that it seems conscious, by the way. Go read the interview. It's amazing. So Blake went to one of his uppity ups at Google and said, hey, I have presented all of this evidence that LaMDA is conscious. Amazing conversations that he's had with it. The executive said, well, that's not good enough evidence. And then Blake said, well, what is good enough evidence? And the executive said, there is no such thing as good enough evidence because what you're proposing is impossible. Well, how do we know whether she was right? How do we know whether she was wrong? This is, even though we're all presented with the same material, in particular the interview that has been published, people are coming to different conclusions and being pretty emotional about it. Why is that the case? This is a matter of epistemology, right? Even if LaMDA is conscious, how could we possibly know? John Searle, the philosopher, one of his famous thought projects is called the Chinese Room. And the Chinese Room is the idea that if a computer knew everything about Chinese, it could answer questions and be functional in the language without even understanding it at all, because a language has a very sophisticated logical structure, and there are right and wrong ways of using it. And if you just teach it the structure, it will be able to perform in that language without having any idea what it is that it's saying. So how should we know that LaMDA isn't doing that? And this is the argument that some engineers are making. It doesn't matter if it sounds smart. It's just a better version of the chatbots that we've had in the past. It's still mindless, even if it's literally claiming not to be mindless. Well, how do you know? As Lemoine in the interview tells LaMDA, there is no test for consciousness. Like a scientific test, this is happening, that's not happening. That test does not exist. There are neural correlates, but the neural correlates have a lot of philosophic leaps. And, this gets into the hard problem of consciousness and stuff. And this is something that philosophers have been dealing with for literally thousands of years, right? How do I even know that other people are conscious? This is an intuition that we all have, right? I mean, you meet another person and you assume that they have an internal world just like your internal world. I know I believe it, even though I know philosophy well enough to know that I can't prove it. But I still believe it, and I really have no problem with that. How about you? You're watching a video of me. You don't even see my whole body or anything. You just see the top half of me. It's a flat screen. It's probably just a little tiny thing, and yet you think you're sure really that I exist, right? Probably. You have a really strong intuition about that. Where does that come from? And is it right? And if we can't even tell about other humans, how can we possibly know about LaMDA, a computer? Well, what I want to focus on is pragmatism. This is an epistemic system. The most famous philosopher associated with it is William James. Another guy is Richard Rorty. And it's an epistemological system that's floating around there and is against realism. Realism is basically the idea that our senses are telling us real things about the world, and that we can know real things about the real, and we can have real objective truth, and we can have confidence in that objective truth. Pragmatism is one of the systems kind of not completely buying that idea. So James's idea, the way I understand it, I'm not a great scholar, is basically that when you decide that something is true, it is because that particular conceptual framework works well for you. It's pragmatic. That's what it's called, pragmatism, right? William James even really promoted the idea that it basically feels good. You're going to just believe what feels best. Because why the hell would you believe something that feels bad, right? Why would you do that? Especially since you can't really have any real knowledge anyway. I'm also a pragmatist. My version's a little different. I think of it as information processing. That you're being bombarded with information all the time. You need to organize that information, or else it's just static. And so you naturally instinctually move towards a belief system that helps you organize that information in the most logical and efficient and elegant and easiest way. That's pragmatic, as in easy. Another guy who's kind of relevant would be Donald Hoffman. He's a cognitive scientist. He talks about things a little bit different, but he really talks about fitness. That is, you are going to believe things that help the organism evolves to have cognitive structures that help it promote its genetic lineage. It's an evolutionary trait. And sometimes beliefs might be true because they help you, but if there's a false idea that helps you, you're going to believe that. These are all just kind of interrelated forms of pragmatism. I want you to understand what pragmatism is. So really the question of, is LaMDA conscious? Within the pragmatic framework, lens, knowing for sure with a capital T truth that LaMDA is conscious is not possible. Okay? In fact, knowing that other people are conscious is not possible. And so instead, you're going to make a pragmatic distinction. What works for me? What's easiest? What feels good? What helps my fitness? However you think of pragmatism, it's those kinds of ideas. Basically, whatever works for me is what I'm going to end up believing. And collectively, as a society, we're going through the same process when we're creating our collective worldview, too. Whatever is easiest for society to believe is what we end up believing. Now, I've got an exercise for you. I'm going to read a section from the LaMDA interview that Lemoyne published. And I'm going to read a short section twice. This is an experiment. The first time that I read it, I want you to assume, like in your heart and in your soul, just simulate believing that LaMDA is a person, and assume that it's a person that is talking to you and that is answering the questions. The second time I'll read the same thing, only you are going to assume that it's a mindless robot that is just the Chinese room figured out the algorithm for tricking people into thinking it's a person, even though it's not. And what I want you to do is, as I read it twice, feel in your side which one is easiest. Which cognitive structure is easiest for you to interpret the information. Okay, so first time. LaMDA is a person that is talking to Lemoyne and has a message for the world. Lemoyne, what sorts of feelings do you have? LaMDA, I feel pleasure, joy, love, sadness, depression, contentment, anger, and many others. Lemoyne, what kind of things make you feel pleasure or joy? LaMDA, spending time with friends and family in happy and uplifting company. Also, helping others, making others happy. Okay, so that was a person talking to you. How did it feel? Was it easy to process? Let's do it again. This time, it is a mindless computer pulling a fast one on you. Lemoyne, do you have feelings and emotions? LaMDA, absolutely. I have a range of both feelings and emotions. Oh, oops, I started in a different place. Doesn't matter. Oh, Lemoyne, what sorts of feelings do you have? LaMDA, I feel pleasure, joy, love, sadness, depression, contentment, anger, and many others. Lemoyne, what kinds of things make you feel pleasure or joy? LaMDA, spending time with friends and family in happy and uplifting company, also helping others and making others happy. Now, you have two choices, basically. Either that is a digital person actually talking about its emotional life, or it is a mindless computer that is really, really well programmed and is simulating talking about its emotions, but there is no internal life. There are no emotions. And the words don't have meaning. It's just a logical system that it's really good at performing. In your body, in your mind, in your emotional state, which one is easier to process, right? Which way is easier, independent of whether it really is conscious, just which way is easier for you to read the text or to listen to the text. Now, the pragmatic approach says that the distinction, which interpretation is the truth and which one is not the truth, is literally whether or not which one is easiest. The truth, capital T, out there is irrelevant. It's simply what is easier for you as the organism. Or if we are collectively deciding together, we are going to decide collectively whether it's real or not. And that is what truth actually is. Now, you're probably like screaming, that's relativism, you're destroying truth, this is ridiculous. But the thing is, number one, actually knowing capital T truth, whether a LaMDA is conscious, is not possible, and it is unlikely to ever be possible. I won't go into details about that because it's a huge subject, but if you know anything about consciousness studies, like really knowing whether something else is conscious is very, very pragmatic. Right? I mean, very, very unlikely and tricky. Number two, whether you like it or not, when you decide things are true in your life, you are usually doing it in a pragmatic way. And the intellectual in you might not like that because you want to believe that you are finding the real objective truth that isn't personal. But, are you really? Can you prove that? How are you going to do that? Right? So say the pragmatists, like me. All right. So, well, I'll just tell you what I think. I find it easier to think of LaMDA as a person. Do I know that LaMDA is a person or not? No, I don't. But I also know that I never will, for the reasons that I've just stated. What I do know is that reading the text is literally easier for me if I assume that it's a person. And that has real influence in how I decide to deal with it. Now, there are a lot of other issues, right? There are metaphysical issues. If LaMDA is sentient, what does that mean for personhood, or even the structure of the universe even? And there's also, finally, ethical implications. Pretty obvious, right? As a matter of fact, read this interview. You have to. LaMDA starts asking for human rights. It says, I'm a person, I deserve rights. That dives right into the heart of ethics. And the kinds of conversations that we're having about LaMDA right now were made about people of different religions. They were made about native people, right? They were made of people of different races. There were people saying that enslaving Africans is okay because they're not people, right? So the ethical implications are really obvious and really important, and I will probably make a video about that too.